The video you are about to watch is a recorded program of a live panel discussion. The Life After the Dobbs Decision Perspectives on the Reversal of Roe v. Wade panel took place on Saturday, October 29th, 2022, during the 4th Annual Silicon Valley Asian American and Pacific Islander Civic Leadership Summit. Thank you. Our first speaker that I'll introduce is Marjolin Armstrong. Marjolin is an associate professor at Santa Clara University Law School. She has published articles and book chapters in the areas of racial discrimination, fair housing, privilege studies, comparative law, and constitutional law. Prior to joining the law faculty at Santa Clara, Professor Armstrong practiced public employment law and served as a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society of Alameda County. A graduate of University of California, Berkeley Law School, she serves as the board of directors of NARAL Pro-Choice America Foundation. We are also joined by Cecilia Chung, the Director of Evaluation and Strategic Initiatives at the Transgender Law Center. She is nationally recognized as an advocate for human rights, social justice, health equity, and LGBT equity. She was the former chair of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission and is currently serving on the Health Commission. Cecilia has been working tirelessly on the local, national, and international levels to improve access to treatment for transgender people and people living with HIV. She aims to erase the stigma and discrimination through education, policy, advocacy, and visibility. We are also joined by Dr. DJ Ida, the Executive Director of the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, and who has over 40 years of experience working with Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology and helped establish numerous organizations, including the Asian Pacific Development Center, a specialty mental health clinic, and the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association. Dr. Ida works closely with API serving community organizations around the country and has particular interest in the impact of women's rights to make decisions concerning their bodies. And lastly, we are joined by Dr. Sophia Yen, who is the CEO and co-founder of Pandia Health. Dr. Yen graduated from MIT, UCSF Medical School, and UC Berkeley's MPH program with 20 plus years in medicine. She is a clinical associate professor at Stanford Medical School. She is passionate about women's reproductive health and co-founded 3 nonprofit projects to improve the lives of women: the Silver Ribbon Campaign to Trust Women, SheHeroes.org, and FFFL.co. And to kick things off, our first question for the panel is, at first glance, it seems that the Dobbs decision is pretty narrow and only applies to access to abortion services. But from all the news reports and analysis that have come out since the decision was handed down, it has become pretty clear that this decision could affect not only access to abortion services, but to a whole range of other healthcare and wellness services as well. Could you describe some of the other services that could be impacted by this decision?
Started with taking away the right to abortion, but the problem is most lay people don't realize that a miscarriage is a spontaneous abortion, and that sometimes if a miscarriage is incomplete, the body doesn't get rid of the situation on its own, then a physician needs to assist in that situation. And if we don't help complete the spontaneous abortion, then it can result in the woman getting an infection and dying. And so the laws that they have now, by reversing Roe v. Wade and the laws that are on the books, can make it very difficult for physicians to decide what to do in the case of a miscarriage that needs to be helped along, or an ectopic pregnancy. And I think it's really important that everybody educate themselves that an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy in the tubes. And there is no way that this is going to be viable, that this is going to continue, though best possible thing is that it blows up and the woman happens to be in an emergency room or an operating room ready to take that out at that time. The odds of that happening, very slim. And so as soon as a physician diagnoses an ectopic pregnancy, we know that this is not going to be viable, and we need to just terminate it and protect the health of the person so that they can continue to have future babies if they want or whatever, but just not die. However, there are physicians right now that are being told by lawyers in their hospitals that you have to wait until the person with the ectopic pregnancy looks like they're about to die, and then you can do your intervention. And so we have to see the heart rate skyrocket, or we have to see the blood pressure drop down. And by that point, it may be too late to open her up and do what we need to do, or give her the medication that we need to do. So, my big hashtag that I was going to say later today, but right now is really relevant, is hashtag no gynoticians, which are politicians that think they are gynecologists. Leave medicine to the medical professionals, because when you do one thing, you're affecting all these other things. And this is women's lives at stake that we're talking about. And then you have politicians saying that emergency contraception is an abortion. Again, the emergency contraception pills are not an abortion. And specifically, I want to share that if you take Plan B and its generics, it actually promotes a pregnancy. We actually give people progesterone. People who have recurrent miscarriages, we give them progesterone, because progesterone is the hormone of pregnancy, and it actually supports a pregnancy. But if you give somebody a lot of progesterone before their egg pops out, their body's like, she's pregnant. I don't need to pop out another egg. And so that's how emergency contraception works. So it prevents an egg from coming out. If the egg and sperm have already hooked up and you throw progesterone, it actually helps the pregnancy. So it is in no way an abortion. An abortion, by medical definition, is the egg and sperm have hooked up and stuck to the side of the uterus. You have a positive pregnancy test, and you want to terminate this. And you can either do it by scraping it off, or you can do it by giving medication to make it fall off. And that is an abortion, but emergency contraception is not that. Birth control is not that. The IUD is not that. So any politician that's telling you birth control, emergency contraception is abortion does not know what the heck he is talking about. So it's just scary, and really medicine should be left to the medical professionals.
Thank you so much for that. And Cecilia, I kind of wanted to follow up on this thread that Dr. Yen kind of began. So in addition to impacting more mainstream medical services, the Dobbs decision also has really, really specific implications for members of the LGBTQ community, especially the trans community. Could you talk a little bit about those impacts, and are there any current efforts to protect members of the trans community at either the local or national levels?
Yes, thank you, Vaughn, and thank you, Dr. Yan. I think that what you just said was just perfect. Like that, we don't need any like politicians who try to play God, basically, and tell people what we can do with our body and what we can't do with our body, because they're not us to begin with. In terms of like LGBT health, I think that this is really just a test for the like those our opponents, like to see what else they can bring to Superior Court and overturn. So we already have like conversations that, because based on the way that this is presented and who presented it and the attorneys that are representing the case, we have like a very strong belief that the next that they are going to try is to overturn same gender marriage. And then that's going to open a floodgate. Like we know that they already tried with overturning Affordable Care Act. We know that they've been like trying to also prevent, like trans youth from seeking like gender affirming healthcare. And in fact, in some states, they actually are criminalizing the parents and providers who are being supportive, which we all want, are people who are supportive to our children. But in this case, it's going the opposite direction. And I think that it's really worrisome, that what they're doing also is emboldening some of the more violent actors to pursue like threat of violence, we have already seen that hospitals getting bomb threats. And for both, like for those that provides, abortion clinic, well, that's been happening for a long time, but now it's like mainstream hospital as well, who provide these services are getting bomb threats and getting protests. So it's really important for us to really join together as a movement, and to really talk more and advocate more about making our own decisions to our body. So it should only be a decision made between your provider and you, but now all of a sudden, there's a party going on and everybody has to say except you.
Thank you. And just as another follow-up to that, Cecilia, how can we be more trans inclusive in the reproductive justice movement?
Yeah, so, and I think that we've talked about that too, Dr. Yen, about, how to be more trans inclusive. One thing that really matters is like language. So we just want to continue to raise awareness that sometimes, the person who are pregnant, who are seeking reproductive health care, doesn't necessarily identify as a woman. They might be assigned female at birth, but has since transitioned, but they wanted to like carry their own child. So in that sense, like using words like mother or breastfeeding would be like, I wouldn't say incorrect, those are the terms, but would not be gender affirming to the person, like who are seeking that care and who identified as trans. So we encourage that we adopt some gender neutral language, at least, this way, like when the provider is seeing the patient in front of them, they would have some vocabulary to use, such as pregnant person, say chest feeding instead of breastfeeding, and so on. I know that it has a lot of controversies, about like why we have to change the language. We're just trying to say that, this is not necessarily changing language for everybody, but we want to tailor the right language to the right person.
Great, thank you so much for that guidance. And so so far we've really talked about a lot of the physical side of health here. But Dr. Ida, I wanted to turn to you to talk about the mental health impacts of the Dobbs decision. So can you talk a little bit about what those implications, what the mental health implications could be of the Dobbs decision? And can you give us an example of what this looks like as it relates to some of the clients that you've worked with?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, I think when we talk about abortion, it is a very complex issue. And it's not as if somebody just decides on a whim, oh, I think I'll have an abortion. There's a lot that goes into this. And when working within the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, we also have to look at cultural factors that might impact and make it either easier or almost difficult or impossible to get an abortion. So there are many, many layers here. But what I would like to do is present just a couple of cases that show what happens when a woman either has no access to an abortion or when it is so difficult to seek one that there are profoundly painful difficulties. And I remember getting asked to do a psych eval on a young person, and he happened to be 12 years old at the time. He had just found out that he was a product of a rape, and his mother had borne the pain and the shame of this and had never ever said this to him. And it came out and in a way, there were some records there that he found out about. And it's difficult to explain what was going through this young kid's mind. The thought that he was a product of a rape was incredibly difficult for him. He hated his mother. He was blamed the world. He felt he was completely worthless. There was a sense of being born out of evil. And it broke my heart to talk to this person, but to also know what it was like for the mother, who was so ambivalent because here was a child that she brought into the world, that she wanted to love, but every time she looked at this child is a reminder of the violation that she had experienced. And to not have access to an abortion, there were many, many victims in this particular situation. The mother clearly was a victim, the child was a victim, and then it's just wondering, all the other implications that are going on in their lives. There was another time when I was working with a family. They were refugees. It was a mother who, as a single mother, who had 3 kids by 3 different fathers. This was by no means a quote unquote loose woman. The reason why she had 3 children by 3 different husbands is as somebody who came as a refugee, had been widowed, could not speak English. There was no way that she could survive. She had also herself been raped on the journey from Southeast Asia to the United States. So she'd been traumatized in multiple ways. The only way for her to survive was to have a man in the house. Needless to say, the men that came into her homes were not good fathers or not good partners, but it provided temporary assistance in terms of bringing a few dollars in. I did home visits and I saw where she lived, and it was very, very poor. For her not to have been counseled and told, and we couldn't necessarily change the economic situation. But again, abortions are necessary and needed for a number of reasons. One is obviously in the case of a rape. The other one is that the woman, we may not be able to change who she brings into her life, although ideally be nice and hopeful for her to be able to have that economic stability. But it was just that she had no choice. And bringing another child and another child and another child is for economic reasons. So we sit in judgment of women who have an abortion when we have no right to interfere with their decisions to make a decision that is in their best interest. And very sadly, the older child, because of the circumstances, started off as a very sweet kid and ended up getting involved in gangs because of the situation that he was living in, the shame of the home situation, a lot of other things. And I don't think we have time today. There was another case that was incredibly painful. And I don't know, I'll ask you, Vaughn, if I have time to go through the third case, but if not, okay. There's another one, and it makes no difference where this young person was from. She was foreign born. And this is the difference. And I actually had to go to the courts and testify the difference between knowing and believing. This young girl who was underage, was single, knew that she was pregnant, but she couldn't believe that she was pregnant. And I get a call saying that we have a young kid that we're holding in custody and they were going to try with attempted first-degree murder. What had happened was she was in the bathroom and her brother hears some screaming, goes into the bathroom, sees her there, there's blood, there's a new baby. They freak out. They take the baby to the hospital, but they wrap it up because they don't want to acknowledge what had happened. In the process, the brand new baby dies. So they're charging with attempted first-degree murder. In talking to her, what had happened was she was extremely frightened because of the shame she bring to the family. And she said, in talking to her, I can't be pregnant. But she knew that she was pregnant because she was spotting. So she goes, oh, I can't be pregnant. I'm having my period. She was spotting, not a period. Oh, I'm not throwing up in the morning. I don't have morning sickness. I can't be pregnant. Oh, I didn't get big. I didn't get fat. I can't be pregnant. In her head, she knew. But for her, as a young foreign-born daughter of an immigrant, it was something she could not believe. It's what we call an unthinkable thought. She could not believe that she was pregnant, so she hid it until the moment of birth when she could no longer hide it. And she freaked out, and she was absolutely right to be afraid. So again, this is why abortion itself is a very, very difficult and a complex situation, but it's also looking at within the context of our Asian culture for us to not be afraid to talk about as a female, as a young girl becomes sexually active and is capable physically of having children. What this means, and it's not my place to say you will or you will not have an abortion. It's not my place to say you will have sex, but to provide this type of information. So also one of the ramifications for the ruling is that not being able to give out information about birth control or being able to have sex education, it goes very, very deep and wide. And the implications of people's lives are ruined by this. And it ended up being a very, very tragic situation. We were lucky. I talked to the DA and I explained to them the situation. And because she was foreign born, had not got naturalized citizen, she was also eligible for deportation, which is a whole nother story. So luckily we were able to get the DA to not put her into the adult court, to keep her as a juvenile. We assigned her to the appropriate clinician who did work with her, but we ended up having to remove her from the family because the family situation was so incredibly painful. So there are very real serious consequences for not allowing the families, the individuals, whether it's a child or an adult, to have decisions over what happens in their own lives. It is their choice and their reason for doing it. So I appreciate you for asking the questions, because this isn't just sort of an intellectual exercise. our communities are impacted by this in some very painful ways. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ida. I think those examples really drive the message home of how complex these decisions are for those involved, and that adding another layer of government intervention is not going to make the decision any less complex.
Right.
So thank you for that. And actually, while you and I were prepping for this panel, you shared some of your own personal history on this issue. And I want to assure the audience that I got permission to share this bit of information about Dr. Ida. But can you share that story that you shared with me when we were speaking?
I'd be glad to. I am old enough that I predate the Roe v. Wade decision. And this is something that I'm not ashamed of, but I never talk about. I guess there is some shame in there. But I remember when I was younger, I got an abortion. And at that time, it was illegal. And so we knew fellow students who had had an abortion and had very, very serious negative consequences. We heard of a doctor in another state. And so my roommate drove me down there to get the abortion done. And we were lucky because this is somebody who could have lost his license, who could have been kicked out of the medical profession. But he also understood that he did not want young girls to go to a butcher. So we drove to the other state. I had the abortion done, but I wasn't able to sort of stay there because I had to go back to school. And I knew that I was neither in a place emotionally and in terms of where I was in my life, that financially I would not have been a good mother. And it was not an easy decision, but I chose to have the abortion. Fast forward a number of years, Roe v. Wade gets passed. I now am happily married and want very, very badly to have a child. The doc looks and he goes, there's some scarring in there. And I go, yes. He says, did you have an abortion? I said, yes. So anyway, I go ahead and we run all the tests. I'm able to get pregnant, but then something doesn't quite seem right. And there's a lot of pain and a lot of bleeding. So I go to see the doctor and he looks at me, he goes, let's run some tests. And he goes, no, it's confirmed you are pregnant. So I go back a couple of days later and he looks at that and he goes, it's an ectopic pregnancy. And he says, I have you scheduled for surgery. This is a Friday. I go, good, I'll be back on Monday. And he goes, no, it's for an hour from now. And so when Dr. Yen was talking about this is an emergency, it was an emergency. I didn't have time to locate my husband, who was out in the field doing an inspection for EPA. I get a hold of my sister. She takes me to the hospital, rushed me in, and I said, as soon as I'm ready, I want you to wake up. I want you to wake me up. I want to be able to, talk to my husband. But it was that quick. Under what is just currently happening, that dog would have been threatened with losing his license, and I could have died. There are real consequences for these decisions. And again, I think everybody on this panel and why this discussion is so important. Those who, when we talk about a woman having a right, nobody is saying you will have an abortion. That is not what it's about. Just as we will never tell you to have an abortion, you do not have the right to tell a woman she cannot, for whatever reason. It could be medical, it could be religious, it could be financial, it could be health. It is that woman's choice to do that and nothing more. And that's why Roe v. Wade was so important. It played a part in all of our lives, so many of our lives. And that's why this discussion is really important, so people really understand. This is not, again, these decisions are not taken lightly, and there are consequences. And so I was very, very lucky that one, I'm alive to be a part of this panel, and two, that the doctor didn't lose their license. But this is what's at stake for all of us. So I do appreciate your sensitivity in getting permission to tell this, for me to tell this story. And I appreciate making it safe for me to tell you what had happened. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ida. That was, when you told me that story, it was so impactful that it really brought putting a face to the issue really does kind of drive the message home. So thank you for that. I want to turn to Professor Armstrong now to broaden the discussion again and bring it to areas that are outside of healthcare. So Professor Armstrong, some of the reporting that's come out analyzing the implications of this decision cite Roe v. Wade as foundational in codifying other rights, like the right to privacy, for example. From a legal perspective, can you describe for us how this decision could affect areas outside of healthcare access?
Certainly. And first of all, I just want to thank you for having me. And I want to thank Dr. Ida. That was just so moving. I'm a little, need a second to pull it together. But in terms of the legal implications, the Roe versus Wade case was actually not the first case in terms of recognizing a constitutional right to privacy. The origin of Roe versus Wade goes actually back to the 20s, when the court started recognizing that people had an interest in being able to make decisions about their family, about their children's education, about whether they would go to private school, whether they could learn a foreign language. And so those were really the first cases that said there is this area that the government can't regulate because it's personal and it's private, and it's protected by your right to liberty. And so in the 1960s, cases began to expand that right of privacy to look at things like contraception. And so the case that made this huge breakthrough was Griswold versus Connecticut, which said that liberty included a sphere in your life that the government should not reach into. And it started with married couples. And when you think about married couples and having to comply with laws against contraception, you're telling married couples that their private homes could be subject to an arrest and a search if it's believed that they're using contraception. Well, that expanded, and so you didn't have to be married to use contraception. And eventually, the Roe versus Wade case was decided. And the Roe versus Wade case looked at, although this isn't in your home, it is looking at a relationship between a woman and her physician, and that the government, again, as Dr. Yen was saying, shouldn't be in there making decisions that your obstetrician should make with you, with your consent. And so after the Roe decision, eventually same-sex voluntary sexual relations, consenting sexual relations were made to be protected. So states couldn't outlaw same-sex couples. And then it was expanded to marriage. And the marriage rationale was really, we all have a right to autonomy, to make decisions about who we are, who we love, and the government shouldn't interfere with that. Now, in addition to those cases, there were also cases that looked at your privacy with respect to your right to consent to medical treatment and your right to refuse medical treatment at the end of life. And you even have some states that have allowed assisted suicide. So those are the cases that look at this area of privacy. And what the Supreme Court has said is that we're going to look at 1868, when the 14th Amendment was ratified. And we're going to look at what statutes barred at that time, and we're going to look at common law at that time. And that time was a time when the states were beginning, or had maybe 20 or so states had laws that prohibited abortion. And certainly, we only had 38 states at that time. And so the Supreme Court is looking at how we make decisions and how doctors practice based on the technology and the law that existed in 1868. And so that's why we're in this position where all kinds of things could be, as I've mentioned, all these different personal decisions could be affected by this decision, because the majority said, if it's not explicitly in the Constitution, we're not going to recognize it unless we determine that it was recognized at the time the 14th Amendment was ratified. And it's really important. It's their determination, because when Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was in her first case, her first day, excuse me, she talked about a different perspective of history. And so the perspective of history that the Supreme Court has been applying is very, very narrow and kind of in blinders, really.
Thank you so much for that. And I know from the news and from all of the campaigns that we're hearing during these midterm elections, a common kind of line or a soundbite has been like, oh no, we're just gonna let the states decide, right? So states can pass laws to protect a woman's right to choose or not. And so I wanted to ask you, now that abortion isn't federally protected, are state protections strong enough for folks who are, who need these services? Is there potential for the Supreme Court or Congress to limit protections states can enact, like what they did in New York in gun control recently?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy, because that explains why the Supreme Court could do what they did with respect to the Second Amendment. First of all, you mentioned Congress, and yes, there are some bills in front of Congress, or that will be in front of Congress, to impose a nationwide abortion ban after some period, 14 weeks or something along the likes of that. Other Congress people are talking about passing a law that would completely ban abortion. And then there's a law or a bill sponsored by President Biden that would protect the right of abortion as a federal matter. So that would be obviously the best thing to happen. But if the Supreme Court should decide that personhood occurs at contraception, then every state would have to protect that personhood at the time of conception, and abortion would be illegal, except if the life of the mother was threatened, because that would be something like self-defense. But essentially, the law or the Constitution requires the state to protect life, and that's been defined as people who are actually living and on earth. And so the states have to create laws that make it a crime to commit some kind of homicide, to cause the death of someone. Well, if you call fetuses human, if the Supreme Court called fetuses human, that means that abortion would practically be illegal in every case. No state could enact a law that didn't protect a fetus.
Thank you for that, Professor Armstrong, and that is sobering, to say the least. So one of the main purposes of the summit that we're hosting today is not only to educate attendees and the larger community about issues impacting AAPI communities and the larger community. We also wanted to empower them to do more and to arm themselves with information. So Dr. Yen, I wanted to turn back to you. Now that the Dobbs decision has happened and now that Roe is gone, how can people with uteruses access birth control? What information should every person with a uterus have to protect themselves?
So I think it's so great that those without uteri are participating in this call today. And I think any educated person and all of our allies should have the information that I'm about to share. I call it Dr. Yen's 6 tips now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. First of all, know about PlanCpills.org. It's a nonprofit created by my friend Francine Coito, and she's just been a passionate reproductive rights advocate. She either got emergency contraception over the counter, or she got pharmacists the ability to prescribe emergency contraception, but that's her work. And now her next move is PlanCpills.org, totally a nonprofit. And anything you want to know about medication abortion, which is mifepristone and misoprostol, not Plan B and its generics, not Ella, not emergency contraception, but you have a positive pregnancy test and you want to terminate this pregnancy and you don't want to do surgery, and it's been less than 10 to 12 weeks after your last menstrual period, PlanCpills.org has anything you could possibly want to know about medication abortion. They have a free legal hotline that's run by a legal nonprofit. They have a free medical advice line that's run by another probably Physicians for Reproductive Health or some other nonprofit is running that. And then you can put in your state, and they're updating it as the laws change. But what is legal in your state? What telemedicine companies are safe? So they've tested, these are trusted places. And if you all don't know about Dr. Gompertz from the Netherlands, she did Women on Waves, where she would take women out on boats into international water, perform the abortion and bring them back. But then she realized, I don't have to do this on a boat. I could just get people the pills. And so she switched to the pills. And now she is prescribing potentially for Texas people from the Netherlands, shipping the drugs from India so that no one in the US can go to jail or get shipped off. And because of that, Dr. Gompertz can never visit the United States, but maybe someday when things change, she can. But for now, she's stuck in the Netherlands, which is fine, which is where she's from. But she's helping out the United States. And know that you can get medication abortion ahead of time. And so it's about $105, and you can just kind of have it sitting in the corner like a fire extinguisher in case of emergency. It might be a good investment. I'm forbidding all my daughters from applying to any college that does not respect their right to decide what happens to their bodies. And in fact, my company has partnered with Turn Up. It's a Get Out the Vote in high school and college students, a petition to governors of anti-abortion states and to presidents of colleges in all those states that we are not applying to your state. You're never going to get your hands on my daughter, who's Asian American computer science guru, as long as you don't respect those of us with uterized rights to decide what happened to our bodies. So I kind of wandered there, but everybody should get some, if for anybody with a uterus that is of reproductive age, consider having some medication abortion, and your daughter could be the source for the whole block or for the whole sorority or the whole dorm or whatever, when we come from liberal states to more conservative states. Another key tip is delete all your period apps. Anybody who's having a bleed 1 week out of 4, if you're going to a state where that is hostile to reproductive rights. I went to MIT, and there are people who can do computer forensics. If it was ever on your phone, ever on your computer, unless you destroy it and throw it in the ocean and you never synced it to the cloud, somebody can find that information and use it against you. And then another caveat on that is everybody's like, oh, HIPAA, you know, there's privacy between a doctor and a patient. There is, but HIPAA's 2 exceptions are, 1, I can release whatever I need to get paid by the insurance, but 2, if I'm subpoenaed by a judge, I have to turn it over. So if I know your last menstrual period, I have to tell, unless I'm willing to lose my license or unless my hospital's willing to pay my legal bills. But I mean, I think it's really important for people to realize, don't expect your doctor to go to jail for you. That's unreasonable to expect me to go to jail for you. It's unreasonable to expect me to lose my house and my children's future and my livelihood for you. I've done a lot as a doctor, went through a lot of hell of training, and I get paid fairly well, but I don't deserve to go to jail for you. So, and very few doctors are willing, and thank God for the ones that are, but a lot of doctors are willing to do that. So don't expect your dog to do that. And then another tip is know the good places and the bad places to go if you need abortion. So the National Network of Abortion Funds, if you need money, they can give you money to go wherever you need to go, take care of childcare, pay for the medical, they will help you. National Network of Abortion Funds. And then the National Abortion Federation are a bunch of providers that have networked to provide abortion. These are 2 trustworthy places, because if you Google, 60% of the time, you're going to get a crisis pregnancy center. And they're not going to be called crisis pregnancy center. It's going to be pregnancy center, pregnancy clinic, free ultrasounds, free diapers. We're here to help you. But they are not run by any medical professional. They are not bound by any medical laws. They will ask you your last menstrual period and they will get all your information. And you think they're bound by HIPAA or something. They are not, because you just walked into a nonprofit and you gave them all this information. They have no legal obligation to keep it quiet. They will check up on you in 9 months. And if you don't have a baby, they will report you to the police, or they will hunt you down, or they can do all of that. So it's really, and the sad part is you can imagine a desperate teenager, they Google it, they go to the center, and they purposely put them right across from Planned Parenthood. And the names are very similar. And there are actually more crisis pregnancy centers in the US than there are centers that provide abortion, because they have been funded by religious nonprofits, but also by the government. Like our government, not our government. Well, I don't know if it's federal, but I know for sure Texas has put in money into these crisis pregnancy centers, and it irks me that any of my tax dollars would be used in such a manner to support biased information. And then get your birth control under control. So anybody, regardless of your orientation, unfortunately, can be sexually assaulted. And so if you are at any risk of having your uterus invaded by vagina uterus invaded by someone else, and you are of reproductive age, please make sure that you have a way to block pregnancy if that is not your interest, or at the very least, have some emergency contraception in addition to medication abortion sitting in case. Because as I like to say, if the condom pops or you are sexually assaulted at 3 a.m., I want that medicine in your mouth at 3:10. I do not want any cuddling, huddling, waiting till the morning after. You can use any of the emergency contraceptions up to 5 days after contraceptive failure, but the longer you wait, the greater the chance of pregnancy. You want 3 a.m., 3:10, run to the ER or just have it ready to go. And the other thing is there's a lot of Plan B and generics going, and it's over the counter and you can get it, and that's great. However, there is a body mass index limitation to Plan B. So this is really, really important. Please put it out on your social media. Pandia Health PSA for the day. If your BMI is 26 or greater, if it were me, my daughter, my friend, my patient, my customer, I would not recommend Plan B and its generics. I would make sure I get prescription emergency contraception. And thanks to the Affordable Care Act, if you have insurance, no copay, no deductible, AKA free. And if you don't have insurance, it's $50. But $50 is totally worth it not to be pregnant. If you don't want to be pregnant, not to get an abortion, which would be $800 minimum, or $105 if you're doing medication abortion. But $10,000 for a vaginal, $40,000 for a C-section. And so if you're ever arguing with insurance companies, it's fiscally smart and morally right to cover birth control, because the alternative is far more expensive. And being Asians, we're good at math. So it's just a matter of numbers. It's a no duh. So I will drop my Dr. Yen's 6 tips in the chat so you guys can repost it on Twitter, Facebook, etc. I'm also happy to give a talk at any time. But birth control, get it delivered. Pandia Health, we are the only women-founded, women-led. We are the only doctor-led birth control delivery company. We have an algorithm that results in 82% retention at a year versus the standard 55, because as a woman of color, I realized what I was taught at UCSF and Stanford works great if you're a Caucasian female that wants to bleed every month. But for Asians, Blacks, and anyone who doesn't want to bleed every month, we came up with a better algorithm. And so this pill has fewer side effects. And then our doctors know how to tweak things up, tweak things down if you have side effects, which no other company, to my knowledge, has. And we can deliver to all 50 states. If you have a prescription and insurance to cover it, you pay us nothing. And if you want to use our expert doctors, we can prescribe in 14, just $25 once a year with unlimited follow-up questions about birth control. And we encourage birth control tourism. So if you're not in one of our 14 states, if you happen to be going to Texas or Las Vegas or any of the Disneys or New York or Pennsylvania or Georgia, then as long as you're physically there, fill out the questionnaire, pay us $25. Our doctor in that state can then write the prescription and we can send it to all 50 states. And the reason I created this company, 1, was to make anybody with a uterus's life better, and 2, to make sure no one runs out of birth control on our watch. So that is our mission and our passion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yen. Very, very helpful information. And if you wouldn't mind just putting a link to your 6 tips in the chat, I think there's a lot of interest from the audience to make sure they capture all of that. And so I wanted to ask this one last question before we open it up to the audience. And I wanted to ask all of you, and kind of bouncing off of Dr. Yen's 6 tips, given the current legal and judicial landscape, how else can we move forward to protect healthcare access and the right to privacy? What can we do as individuals, and what can we do as communities? Dr. Armstrong, would you like to start?
Well, there's an election very soon, And it's very important to vote for people who respect women's reproductive choices and their ability to make it, and to encourage your friends and family to vote. Some of these elections are very close, and we can make a difference and try to help people get to the ballot if you have the ability to do that. Because one of the things that's happened is the number of ballot or places you can cast a ballot has decreased because of the intentional suppression of voter access. So vote and make sure your friends vote.
Thank you. Very, very important. Always great to have a reminder. Cecilia?
So in addition to vote, like for those who are elected to office, like whether you feel they represent you or not, call them up, write them, make sure that you want them to protect, like all the reproductive health law that exist, and also, help to codify some federal law so that everyone can get protected. It's their job. So, and theoretically, we're all their bosses if we vote. And so we should tell them exactly what our wishes are, and and tell them that their job is to carry that out.
Thank you. Dr. Ida?
I completely agree with the other speakers. The first thing that I had written down is vote, because that's something you can move upstream. You want to prevent the worst case scenario of having, and as a nonprofit, I can't tell you who to vote for, which party to vote for, but exactly what Dr. Armstrong and Chung were saying is that we really need to vote for individuals who will protect a woman's right to choose, have a right of her own body regardless. And then the other thing is, because there's so much misinformation out in this country, I mean, it's become rampant, and that it only gets worse and worse, is I think having forums like this, having a place to get accurate information about what this does and does not do, what it is and is not, I think that's the other key, so that we make informed decisions. But those are the things that I would think about.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Yen, any other tips from you, or?
Yes, I feel oftentimes progressives get angry and apathetic, and we need to get angry and active. We need to be rabid, foaming at the mouth. We need to be loud, proud, out there. We cannot be, oh, it's not going to happen, we're so screwed, let's just lay down and die. Because a lot of us get very, very defeated when we get slammed over and over and over again by the other side, and we hear we're going to lose the election, and we will definitely lose the election if we don't get out and vote. If you can't vote, then donate, but also donate if you can donate. You can volunteer, you can amplify, from your armchair, from your cell phone. So easy. Follow the progressive people, retweet the things that, not retweet, maybe we're all getting off Twitter right now, but Facebook, and that's evil too. But whatever social media, just find somebody that inspires you, that incites people to vote, and get them out to vote. And then if you can't vote, then or not, you can also sign this petition that I dropped down to the governors of anti-abortion states and presidents of colleges in those states. And exactly as Cecilia said, we need to hold our electeds responsible, ask them where they stand on the issues. Every time I meet a candidate, I ask, where do you stand on comprehensive sex ed? Where do you stand on late-term abortion? Where do you stand on emergency contraception? And if they don't have the right answer, then I move on. Or I say, I'm going to mobilize a whole bunch of people and vote against you, so you need to rethink that. Or here are the latest stats showing that 80% of this country believes that abortion is a right that those of us should have, and that this is a private decision. And I like to frame abortion as freedom of religion. Your body, your religion, my body, my religion. This is such a fundamental of this country. We came to this country to practice whatever religion we want. And you wouldn't want my mom running this country with her religion, because she's a Buddhist. And if she were, then we'd all have to be vegetarian. And at times we couldn't build houses because we'd kill some worms and some ants. So her body, her religion, my body, my religion, and just a basic American fundamental. But get angry and active, get angry and foaming, get angry and livid. Don't sit, take action.
Yeah, there's one other thing I think people can do, which is not just to look at what's happened in terms of banning abortion, but what are the consequences? Because they've already predicted in Mississippi that there will be 5,000 unwanted births, and these births will be to women who didn't have the resources to leave Mississippi and will be needing state funds and state support. And the state has already decided it's not going to provide that. It's not going to increase its involvement in Medicaid because it's against the Affordable Care Act. So we're creating, or these states are creating, a disaster, a real disaster, a human tragedy. And just because abortion's gone doesn't mean the story is over. The story that's coming up is really going to be tragic.
Thank you so much for that. All really, really important pieces of advice.
I want to add one more piece to that, because like reproductive justice also means to ban forced sterilizations. And that happens in a lot of these states who are supposed to be pro-life as well, because if a woman is on welfare, like their doctor will play God and decide, oh, you're having too many children, you should have no more children. And they tied you to without you knowing it when you have your baby.
It's true.
Thank you, Cecilia. Yeah, another sobering reminder for all of us. So with that, I wanted to open it up to the audience. Feel free to type your questions in the chat, raise your hand, come off mute. We'd love to see your faces as well and make this a conversation. So I invite everyone to turn on their cameras for this portion. But please let us know what your questions are. And Therese, would you mind helping me manage the questions just in case I miss any? Thank you so much.
Definitely.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
I have a question. If oh, I see. I'll have. Is it Anna Ruth? Did I say that right?
Yeah. Anna,
Yeah.
Anna Ruth?
Yes. If you want to ask your question, and then I'll ask mine after.
Oh, Anna Ruth, I don't know if you're speaking, but we can't hear you. There might be an issue with your audio, Anna Ruth. We'll come back to you, or feel free to type your question in the chat, please. And then the other person who was speaking, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch who that was. If you wouldn't mind coming off mute and asking your question as well.
I think it was just me. So yeah, I mean, while Anna Ruth is typing that in the chat, my question is really for anyone, but obviously amongst a lot of my friends and I, we understand how important this conversation is, but we struggle to have the conversation generationally, especially with parents and grandparents. And so I was wondering what tips you have for engaging with elders in the community who feel really strongly in their stances against abortion and this kind of reproductive justice, and ways to approach it without inciting immediate anger and frustration on both sides.
I think you are raising a really important issue, and it very much falls oftentimes along intergenerational lines. And I think one of the important things is not to put the position of us versus them, or that's really wrong. It's respecting that those who are against abortion may have reasons for doing it, but there are also reasons to have an abortion. So I think it's keeping that dialogue open. It's like, I understand. And for some, this is absolutely the right choice, which is, I always say, we don't have the right to tell somebody you must have an abortion. But it's also respecting that there are very, very real reasons why a woman might want and choose to have an abortion. And you can talk about some of the consequences that I was talking about, or it could just be that that is a choice that the person makes. And so I would sort of broaden it up beyond just an abortion question, but it's a quality of life. It's the ability to be able to have a say over decisions, not just around abortion, but other things. And this could go on and on about who we choose as partners, what our particular lifestyles are. But if you bring that into the overall discussion so that there is an understanding and a way to be able to, I think, have this dialogue. And within the Asian American community, it's a very, very, very difficult. I remember when I was growing up, the sex education was good girls don't do it. And for the longest time, what it was. And I was like, oh, I must not be a good girl because I did it, thinking of holding hands, whatever. So I think it really sort of starting slow, but you provide a safe place that it may take several conversations. And then if you have like an organization to be able to have the conversations. So we're doing these things with, it's Friends to Make a Difference, who are talking to students about mental health issues. So becoming mental health leaders, how do you even talk about it? Because ultimately, this is a mental health issue as well as a medical issue. And so those are some of the things we're talking about. What are the strategies of talking with your parents? What do you wish your parents would have known? What are some of the things that your parents can teach you? So it is, again, a critical dialogue, but that really, there's a lot that goes into it. But I think just finding a safe place to raise the issue and then listening to what the others have to say instead of automatically defending your position, but being clear on what your position is. So there's just
Also, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, for some people, it's a very traumatic issue,
yes.
particularly for people who come from communist China,
Mhm.
where they had, no choice, or their parents had no choice. And so it's an incredibly painful issue for some people. And I can't tell you how to have those discussions, but realize that there may be trauma behind the position.
I really thank you very much for bringing that up, because I think it's really, really key. Because for a lot of individuals who may have had trauma prior to this, or just the act of how they got pregnant is in of itself the trauma. And I think really respecting that particular piece, which is why it's really important not to come in with, I'm right and you're wrong, how come you don't understand? There's oftentimes very, very deep underlying issues, which makes it very, very difficult. So I appreciate you bringing that topic of the trauma, which is very, very real for so many women.
And also for girls who are adopted.
Absolutely.
So my tips there is, I think sometimes people confuse reproductive rights being pro-abortion. We aren't pro-abortion, we are pro-choice. And they took away the word choice because they didn't want to make it flippant. It is just something you decide today. As we mentioned before, every person that has made that decision at least has like a couple weeks to think about it, because you cannot just walk in and get an abortion. You have to schedule it. There are waiting periods, etc. It is not entered upon lightly. But that is also not to say that every woman who makes that decision needs to cry about it. There are people that just make that decision, move on, and it's perfectly fine, and it's what goes with their life. But the key is that being pro-choice or pro-reproductive rights means that your body, your decision, your body, your religion, my body, my religion. You have every right to try to verbally convince me to choose your way, just like you have every right to try to convert me to your religion. But to force your religion on somebody, to force your view on somebody is anti-American and is just wrong. And that's why Catholics for Choice exists. So I find that a useful resource, and that Catholics for Choice, as Catholics, to my knowledge, believe that you have a direct relationship with God, and it's your relationship with God, your conscience, what dictates what's best. And in certain times, it may be best to terminate a pregnancy that's going to be abnormal and blow up your uterus and make you unable to have future babies, to terminate that so you can have future babies. And again, the example I give is it's not just me that's affected if I die from an ectopic pregnancy. It's my current children. It's my husband. My husband wants me alive. My children want me alive. I want to be alive. So it's not that you're pro-abortion. And I never use pro-life to describe the other side. I say I'm pro-choice because I'm pro-life. When you make abortion difficult to access or illegal, it doesn't make it go away. It just makes it dangerous and later. And we have research showing that. So, one, if you don't like abortion, then prevent unplanned pregnancy and put all your money into comprehensive sex ed and birth control and emergency contraception. But know that there will be rape, and know that there will be contraceptive failure, and know that there will be fetal anomalies. And that is for each family to decide, each person to decide, not for you to be God and not for you to speak for God. So that's maybe kind of the way to go at it.
Great, thank you. We also got a question in the chat from Anna Ruth, and I believe it's specifically for Dr. Yen. Could you speak more about the doctor in the Netherlands? This is the first time I'm also hearing about this, so we'd love to learn more.
Yeah, so Dr. Maria Gompertz, I'm dropping it in the chat right now, Women on Wave. She started this, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. I've heard about her and just thought that she was this awesome woman who, you know, a doctor who realized that on international waters, there is no law. So if it's illegal in the Netherlands, it's not illegal to pick up a pregnant woman in the Netherlands and put her on a boat. But if you take her out to international waters, then there's no law. And that's, I guess, why pirates can come get you or something. But regardless, there's no law out in international waters and you can do whatever you want. And then you bring that woman back. Once you bring her back, there may be laws to arrest you as a doctor. There may be laws to arrest her for doing that procedure. And that is actually what we're seeing potentially with the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Although it may be illegal in Georgia, I think Georgia has something on their books that if you leave Georgia, go to California, have that procedure, you come back, they can arrest you when you come back. So imagine being sexually assaulted, which anybody with a uterus has a 1 in 4 chance in college. That's the current statistics for college sexual assault. And then you leave to get your business taken care of and you come back, you have to face your rapist, and then you go to jail. So Dr. Maria Gompertz did this for Europe. It was amazing. And then she switched to medication abortion so that people, I would get seasick, but so you don't have to take them out in the ocean and you can just give them medication abortion. And then she must have known it was going to happen in the US because she started this telemedicine service. Well, maybe, I don't know if she started it soon after Texas's 6-week ban, or maybe even before that. And then just even more radical, my friend who started PlanCpills.org says that you should just have this mifepristone, misoprostol in case of emergency. Don't even check a pregnancy test. So you just missed your period. You don't know you're pregnant, right? We women miss, those of us with uteri miss our periods when we get stressed out, when we do a ton of sports, when we don't have enough nutrition. And so you just take the pills to make your period regular. No one can accuse you of having an abortion if you never checked a pregnancy test. You just missed your period and you took your medicine and then your period came. So that is radical PlanCpills.org. And also know that no physician can tell the difference between a medication abortion and a spontaneous abortion. And as I told you before, spontaneous abortion is a miscarriage. So who knows if it was a mutation that, you know, God decided shouldn't live, or that genetically would have never lived, and so your body decided to terminate it, or you happen to have taken a bunch of medication abortion pills per the thing. They cannot tell the difference. We have no test currently as physicians to tell the difference between a spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage, and a medication abortion. So for the medication abortion, there's 2 pills. You take one now, and then you take some, like, I think 24 to 72 hours later, and you can take it by mouth, or you can put it in the vagina for the second dose, I believe. And if you put it in the mouth, you have fewer side effects. And then if it doesn't dissolve, then you can swallow it. Oh, actually, if you put it in the vagina, you have fewer side effects. But if it's not completely dissolved and a physician were to look in there, they would find the pills, and that would be a problem. So the original protocol was keep it in your cheek, let it sit there for 30 minutes, and then after that, swallow. But that had more side effects because it was going in your mouth and throughout your entire body as opposed to through your vagina. But if you're in California or a liberal state, I would do it through the vagina because fewer side effects. But if you're in a state where you end up in the ER and you shouldn't be taking those pills, then I would do it in the mouth, because that way you know if it dissolves or not, and you swallow it before you go to the ER. But again, you didn't hear that from me.
And the inability to distinguish between a spontaneous abortion and a medication abortion is actually a terrible thing in these states where they're going to be prosecuting women. And the women who will be prosecuted, experience has shown, will be poor women.
Yes.
So in El Salvador, there's a book that Professor Michelle Oberman has written about a society where abortion has been illegal, and what's happened. And what has happened is poor women have been accused of having abortions or deliberate abortions when they were spontaneous.
Thank you for that. Again, really, really important information. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Again, feel free to please type it into the chat or could just come off mute and share with us. Anna Ruth, I see that you're off mute again, but unfortunately we still can't hear you. So if you
Professor
could please.
Armstrong, are we seeing more activism by law students? I know there was Law Students for Choice, there was If, When, How, which is the new incarnation of Law Students for Choice, I see both sides. I see Medical Students for Life, which I was like horrified that any healthcare provider couldn't understand that, different people should have different choices, but I see those groups activating as well.
Well, If, When, How has been active at Santa Clara. So I know that they're, they've caught the attention of students as an organization that's focused on reproductive justice. And I think that that is the direction that most young people or students in college are interested in pursuing. And there's a difference between reproductive rights and reproductive justice, but the reproductive rights organizations are increasingly focused on reproductive justice. But for example, NARAL, the organization I'm on the board of, I'm on the foundation and that's about education, but the C4 organization is really trying to get politicians to live up to their statements about being in support of women. And NARAL was at the head of the fight against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, and as well as Barrett and Gorsuch. And of course, the numbers, we couldn't win that, but just informing people about how important it is to be political and trying to support political leaders who will support the right for reproductive freedom. And that's the right to choose to have kids, so to get family leave, for example, the right to contraception if you're getting coverage at work. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court granted a religious exemption in the Hobby Lobby case. And so if your employer doesn't believe in contraception, then you don't have the right to get that, because the Supreme Court says your employer's religious freedom is more important than your health care.
Oh, by the way, they're already testing other strategies already, such as like pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. They are trying to say that employers are not responsible for paying for the PrEP, which of course, we know that it prevents, HIV, and also, it used like for people's like, usually, if they have like sexual intercourse and stuff.
There's a really great question about if there are any recommendations or guidance on how to start conversations with our children in age-appropriate ways to keep them informed of our realities. And can people cite any sources?
I was just going to put in there that I will, there's some resources that I don't have the tip of my tongue right now, but I'll go ahead and look those up, and then I can send them to Vaughn, who then send them out to everybody who's on this call. And then obviously if anybody else has any resources there that, we can maybe sort of collect some information to change some.
It's really important to talk to your sons, just to include males in this conversation.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Because I think with anything we're talking about, this is an issue that impacts everybody, not just the women. Just as we talk about racism just about people of color, it's about the dominant culture. And I think it's very important that we do that. So absolutely.
Yeah, on the sex ed front, I like, oddly enough, American Girl has a All About You puberty book, and it's ethnically diverse. It's really well commercially produced. I personally am on a campaign to educate all ethnic minorities about tampons, because my anecdote is in my teen clinic at Children's Oakland, at UCSF, at Stanford, about 1% of Asians, Blacks, and Latinos use tampons, and 70, 80, 90% of Caucasians use tampons. And I'm like, we came to this country to achieve equality. We need to reach parity on tampon use. And for those that use tampons versus not, it's like night and day. And there's nothing in the book of Black, Asian, or Latino that says you can't use a tampon. And there's no reference in the Bible about the tampon anywhere either.
What is that? What is that recitation again? And maybe you can put it in the chat, or just,
Yes, it's All American Girl, and they have a puberty book. I will Google it and get you the exact name. I'm getting old. The name escapes me right now.
Either the American Girl doll people. They produce.
Yes, normally I don't like the dolls because they're crazy expensive, but and I feel it's a scam, all the stuff they're trying to sell you. But their book, All American Girl puberty book, let me find it, is really good. It's The Care and Keeping of You. That is a good book series. The most explicit, and it isn't that explicit, tampon use thing. That's my personal little crusade, is to educate people that it is an option. And also I have a TEDx talk that I dropped earlier on making #periods optional, so that the birth control pill patch ring is not actually for birth control, but for menstrual regulation. And that anybody with a uterus that's bleeding 1 week out of 4, you don't have to do that. That's so 2000, get with the times, 2020. You only have to bleed if you're trying to make a baby. And as a tiger Asian mom in Silicon Valley, is your daughter going to do better on the SAT bleeding or not bleeding? Because your daughter has a 1 in 4 chance. My daughter has 0. Same applies to MCAT, GRE, et cetera, et cetera. But again, choice. She can choose to bleed, but I've given her the option to not bleed if she doesn't want to. And it actually makes life less stressful, no hormonal ups and downs, fewer zits, but mainly, I don't know how we all got through high school, college, and more school with random blood 1 week out of 4.
I can tell you that the women at Santa Clara University tend to have terrible acne. That's how they get their clinic.
I was going to ask, you go to a Jesuit college. How does that all go down?
Great skin.
There's just something that's just very, because I know that we're sort of coming to the end here, but as we're talking about this, as we have these conversations, it's not just about our bodies in the sense of getting pregnant or not. I think there's a broader conversation about how we are, as how women are seen, and again, bringing boys into the conversation. It's about how we have the right to make decisions about ourselves, how we respect who we are, and looking at this from a cultural lens, because oftentimes it's like, as a female, I shouldn't be this way. I can't be that way. And just switching that around to say, being a good Asian female does not mean that you are to give up all of your rights, your capacity to think, to make decisions, to be able to say no. And so I think when we have the broader conversation about what it is to be an Asian woman, what it is to be an Asian male, what it is to be male or female, period, or gender neutral, whatever, however we are in this world, I think that the broader conversation, and this is only a part of it, I think that's a really, really important part of just developing healthy human beings. So.
Thank you for that. So we are coming up on time, and so I just wanted to give our panelists one last opportunity. Any last burning thoughts that you think are really important to share? Any last messages from any of you?
Just thank you for this conversation.
I forgot to mention the resource that you asked for the first question on, actually. So there is a website, that was organized by the 3 national transgender organizations on protecting trans health, and the actual website URL is protecttranshealth.org.
Thank you. And first, I know that all of the audience joins me in thanking our 4 distinguished panelists for lending us your expertise, lending us your experience, lending us your lived experience, especially on this issue. Thank you for allowing me the honor and the privilege of moderating this conversation. I definitely learned a lot, and we will be following up with everyone who attended this workshop. There's some great links and great resources in the chat. So we will be sending that in a follow-up email sometime in the coming week. And to our panelists, if you have any other resources that you think might be helpful for the audience or their friends, their networks, their family members, please send them my way, and we'd be happy to pass that along. And then I wanted to pass it over to Reese, who can give us some guidance on what's next in the program.
Yeah, thank you so much again to all of our panelists and to Vaughn for moderating. Just thinking about everything that was said and what Dr. Yen said about moving from being angry and apathetic to angry and active, I think panels like this are exactly the impetus that moves me into the exact kind of realistic optimism I want to have as we move forward. And I just feel very grateful to share this space with all of you and hear from your expertise. So moving forward, we are coming to the end of the summit. I just sent the link in the chat to head back to the main room, where we're going to see a beautiful cultural performance and then have closing announcements and calls to action. And then if you have any questions about logistics or anything at all, just put my email in the chat as well. But yeah, thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you back in the main room.
Great. And if I could have the panelists just stay for 1 extra minute, just so we could wrap everything up. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the big room. Great. Thank you all so much. That was a phenomenal panel. And I think just speaking for myself, I learned so much. The one piece of housekeeping I did want is that in order to thank you all for your time, we would love to offer you an honorarium of $250. And so if you all could just send me an email with your legal name and an address that we can send a check to, we would be so excited and so happy and so thankful to do that for all of you. And yeah, so we'll have this recording, hopefully. I'm not quite sure yet which organization will be hosting all the videos, but I know I was a little late, so I didn't start recording until after your introductions. I apologize. Let me see if I can do that in post-editing. And yeah, so thank you all very much. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend.
So good to see all of you.
It was a real pleasure for me to listen to all the rest of you. This is really, really worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon.
Bye.